Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
On behalf of the Attitude team, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Raising Socially Smart Tweens and Teens. Many children with ADHD struggle to navigate friendships and social groups. At the root of these difficulties, according to today's webinar expert, are lagging social executive function skills. These skills, like perspective taking, cognitive flexibility, situational awareness, they don't always come naturally, but they can be developed and strengthened. So in today's webinar, we will learn more about social executive function skills and what works and doesn't work to help improve these skills. Leading today's presentation is Ryan Wexelblatt. Ryan is the director of ADHD Dude, based in Ventnor, New Jersey, a licensed clinical social worker, school social worker, and father to a son with ADHD. Ryan has been learning and refining his approach to teaching social skills to kids with ADHD for more than 10 years. He creates videos for parents and kids at the ADHD Dude YouTube channel. Before I hand over the microphone to Ryan, I have just a few housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the event resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the certificate of attendance option, look for instructions in the email you will receive about an hour after we wrap up the live broadcast. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 390, that's 390, to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the certificate of attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Play Attention. Enhance brain health and performance. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed at school, home, and work. Their NASA-inspired technology and cognitive training courses improve executive function and self-regulation. Each program includes a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your program along the way. Click the link on the screen to schedule your free one-on-one consultation to discuss a customized executive function training course for you. Call 800-788-6786 or visit playattention.com to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion on executive social skills.
So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So welcome, everyone. If you're new to me, this is actually my third webinar with Attitude, and I'm always really happy to speak to this community who asks such great questions, and I look forward to your questions at the end. A few notes about today. My methodology is research-informed and based on evidence-based approaches. For the sake of time, I'm not going to be citing much research in this presentation, as it's really designed for parents who want practical information, not research data. And a disclosure that I'm required to make because of my professional license, I do benefit financially from the ADHD Dude membership site and YouTube channel. And speaking of the YouTube channel, the picture on the right here is my new animated video series for kids called The Brochachos that you can check out at my YouTube channel, and where I'm teaching concepts pertaining to social skills in these videos. So there's 2 out right now. All right, so I want to tell you a little about myself because I have a little bit of an unusual story. I started off my career in special education as a school social worker, school counselor. And when I have a son who is now 24, I adopted him as an older child when he was 8. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that for children who have been through the foster care system, they tend to often present like kids with ADHD or even some like kids with autism. So there are a lot of executive function challenges. There are a lot of social executive function challenges, emotional regulation challenges. So I knew that my son needed certain things, and one of them was help with social skills. Now, I need to preface this by saying I am from what I call the therapy capital of America, which is Lower Merion, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia. There are more therapists, I think, per capita there than anywhere else in the country, and probably more social skills groups as well. So being that I was, I've been in this field, I knew where to look for things. So when I started looking around for help for social skills for him, I reached out to a few different social skills groups in the area, and there was just something that didn't resonate with me. I could tell that what they were teaching was not really what he needed, or was going to help him learn how to have conversations or show interest in others. A lot of it felt like, very scripted, kind of rote memorization of scripted conversations, or it was kind of, very abstract where they would use art therapy as a means to, make drawings and then have analogies to that. And my son is very concrete. That would not work for him. So at that point, I said, I have to take the learning into my own hands here because I know this is not going to work for him. So that led me on a journey that I'm still on today, and has taken me across the country multiple times, attending conferences, and so on. And one of the things when I started going to conferences on topics pertaining to social skills was that I learned I was probably one of 4 guys, sometimes in a room of 250 women. And that happened over and over. And one of the things I started realizing, the more of these trainings I did, I started realizing, what they're teaching here is not really the way boys, naturally form friendships or communicate with each other. And it made sense because I am in a field completely dominated with women who understandably did not grow up male and did not have that experience of being part of a male peer group growing up. So I saw a need to have a male-specific approach to this. And the first time I advertised that, I was really nervous about it because I didn't know how people would take it. And the response I got from mothers in particular was just unreal. I couldn't believe how supportive they were and how enthusiastic they were, because many of them also, like myself, had, their sons in these various social skills groups that weren't really effective, or, noticed what they were learning just didn't really seem organic. So I do want to make the point that everything I'm going to talk about today in here is not gender specific, but I do have a little bit of a slant in my approach to teaching social skills when I work directly with kids, because I am one of the few people who focuses on social skills in boys. But again, everything that you're going to hear today is not gender specific. So social executive function skills is not an official term. It's a term I started using because if you really think about it this way, social skills are these skills we use when we're interacting with other people. But what kind of controls those skills? Well, it's our executive functioning. And some of you may have heard Dr. Russell Barkley talk about how executive functioning really encompasses all facets of life. So that includes the social realm. So I wanted to come up with a term that addressed the foundation of social skills, and specifically the executive function skills that we have to use when we're interacting or sharing space with others. Thus, I came up with the name social executive function skills. So the executive function skills that are required to socially navigate through life successfully, which many people with ADHD struggle with into adulthood sometimes. In individuals with ADHD, the ones that I find to be the most prevalent include perspective taking, so understanding others' thoughts and feelings and understanding how you're coming across to others. Situational awareness, which people often refer to as reading the room. I refer to it as reading the field, and I'll tell you why. A lot of kids with ADHD do not have great safety awareness. So I want them, or what I teach is that we have to increase our safety awareness, when we're out in the community. And this is something I teach parents as well. So the other one is relating to others' emotions and emotional experiences. So think about this. If I tell you something sad, I expect you to respond a certain way. If you tell me something enthusiastically, you expect me to respond a certain way. If I don't respond in a way that you're expecting, you might think I lack empathy. You might think I'm being insensitive, or you might just think my response is odd. So people expect us to relate to their emotions in a way that is expected based on, the information they're sharing and their tone of voice and so on. The next one is initiation. So specifically asking for help, asking for help or clarification, starting and ending conversations appropriately. Most kids I see are very socially motivated, but they don't always know how to start a conversation with others. And often they don't know how to end a conversation either, which is why I see a lot of kids who just leave places without saying goodbye to anyone. Cognitive flexibility, so being flexible, particularly for the sake of being part of a peer group or having to work with others. One of the things I want to mention about this is, and I'll tell you a little bit about the work I do towards the end, but I do school year programs for boys with ADHD as well as a summer program. And part of my application process is I have one of their current teachers fill out a form. And what I ask in that form is two things. I ask more than that, but two things I ask are, how does your student who's applying to my programs do with working in groups in school? And how would their peers describe them? Because when I ask how they do with working in groups in school, that gives me some insight into their level of cognitive flexibility. And when I say how would their peers describe them, the reason I want to know that is because at the end of the day, the judge of your social skills is not adults. Okay? It's not your teachers, it's your similar age peers. And the last one is appropriate use of humor. I have to tell you, this is not relevant to every kid, but I have never gone through a school year where I haven't had a parent reach out to me and say, my son got into some serious trouble because he made a joke at the lunch table about blowing up the school or something like that, something intended to be funny that obviously was taken seriously because he wasn't using humor appropriately. This picture you see on the right here is me teaching perspective taking. And what I teach kids is that we can basically, all of our thoughts about other people and other people's thoughts about us can be broken up into three categories. I call them, and I used a sports analogy here, clutch, meaning clutch thoughts are when somebody feels comfortable around you, they like being around you. Neutral thoughts are when we're aware of other people and they're aware of us, but we're not really thinking about each other because we're not doing anything that would be kind of unusual for the situation. And I explained that most of our thoughts about other people, we go through life, are neutral thoughts, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the last one is cringy thoughts, which is when you do or say something that makes others feel uncomfortable or vice versa. So this is actually one of my Brochachos videos that you can see where I explain this concept in the video. So I want to be really clear that lagging social executive function skills in kids with ADHD is not difficulty reading social cues. I hear that term used a lot. And I think often when people use that term, they use it as kind of an umbrella term, but it's not difficulty reading social cues. It's the things I mentioned before. Lagging social executive function skills are not a lack of empathy. I have to tell you, that drives me crazy when I hear a parent say, my son lacks empathy. It drives me even crazier when I hear a therapist told a parent that their child lacks empathy. In my experience, kids with ADHD often have more empathy than the general population, but they don't always show it because of their difficulty, responding in a way that's expected to somebody, as I mentioned about, relating to others' emotions. That's the reason why. Lagging social executive function skills does not mean that the child is misdiagnosed and actually has autism. I cannot tell you how many times parents have told me in my Facebook group that their child was diagnosed with autism specifically because of their social executive function challenges, because a lot of professionals don't know that this is prevalent in kids with ADHD. Every summer at my camp, I have a parent say to me, do you think he has autism? And I say, no, why would you think that? And they say, well, because somebody suggested it to me because he has difficulty making and keeping friends. So my point being with this is that this is a topic that is really poorly understood. Lagging social executive function skills is not a lack of positive peer role models. What I always say is you do not pick up social skills by osmosis. If you did, then technically by the time kids got to sixth grade, they probably shouldn't struggle with this anymore, considering, they've been in school at 7 years at that point. So the whole idea that you're just going to be around kids with more developed social executive function skills and you'll improve is a myth. Lagging social executive function skills is not a mental health problem. It's a learning issue, which is something that we can teach the kids. And I teach parents how they can create the scaffolding to help their kids improve their social executive function skills. And it is certainly not the result of poor parenting. So I want to talk about the social executive function and language connection. One of the things I can tell you is that I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so my background is in mental health. But a lot of the work that I'm trained in does not come from the mental health field. In fact, most of it doesn't. It comes from the speech language pathology field. And over time, one of the things that has really perplexed me is why the mental health field has kind of left out the tremendous role language plays in executive functioning and in ADHD. So here's what I want you to understand. Much of executive functioning is based in language because verbal working memory is self-directed talk and stated intentions. I call it brain coach with kids. So if you're not hearing your self-directed talk, or often what's called your internal dialogue, you're going to have social executive function challenges. You cannot improve socially if you do not address the underlying social executive function issues, which are based in language or self-directed talk. Now, we know for many individuals with ADHD, their self-directed talk improves as they get older. Okay, but when it's not there, what we really have to do is model for them what internal dialogue sounds like. And I'm going to give you an example of that a little later. So I want to tell you a little bit about how lagging social executive function skills look like in elementary school to start. So number one, a propensity to be bossy or controlling in play situations. Relating better to younger kids or adults than the similar age peers. I want to explain that one because that's one I hear incredibly frequently. So when kids struggle socially, younger kids have lower social expectations. They might look at them as a role model, and often they can control younger kids. Whereas adults will sit there and listen to you talk about Minecraft, right? And they're not, they're going to be polite. And if you're having a one-way conversation where you're talking at them, they're going to be patient with you. But your same age peers, the ones who are the judge of your social skills, are not going to be patient with you if you're having a one-sided conversation talking at them. And they're definitely not going to tolerate you being bossy and controlling because you struggle with perspective taking and you're not thinking about their thoughts. And they're not going to tolerate your difficulty with being flexible. So that is why a lot of kids with ADHD relate better to younger children or adults than their same age peers. Another one is difficulty in unstructured social situations like recess, but can present okay in structured social situations. That is a situational awareness one. So I often say that for a lot of elementary schoolers with ADHD, the hardest period of the day for them is recess. Difficulty keeping friends, so they can make friends, but they necessarily can't keep them. Thinking that they are being bullied when their words or behaviors elicit a negative response from others. This is one I find that really upsets people because one of the things, and Caroline McGuire in her excellent webinar a few months ago touched on this, that what the research shows is that when kids elicit a negative response in others, or often when there's some type of bullying, it's because there was some words or behavior that elicited that. It's not just kind of out of the blue, okay? So for kids with ADHD, when they struggle with perspective taking, when they struggle with understanding how they're coming across to others, right? Other kids might react negatively to them, particularly if they're being bossy or controlling. And when other kids react negatively and don't do what they want, react to their emotional reactivity, they may say they're being bullied because they're not understanding how their words or behavior elicited this response in others. And that's perspective taking, and it's something we can teach. Smothering a new friend is another one I often see in elementary school. So one of the things is that second grade, so between 7 and age 8, is typically when social executive function challenges become more noticeable. The reason why is developmentally, that's when kids start to understand social relationships a little more. So they understand, before that in kindergarten, first grade, the way we talk to kids in classes, we say, okay, friends, we're going to recess. Okay, friends, it's time to go to art. In second grade, they start realizing, he's nice to me. She's not nice to me. He's weird. Every time I talk to her, she walks away. So they begin to be more conscious of that, which is why, and other kids become more aware of other kids' social executive function challenges. So that's why second grade is often kind of what I say the entry point. But really the entry point for most people is fifth grade. That's when most parents realize that their child needs help because social expectations increase in fifth grade. So often kids want to start becoming part of a same gender peer group more. It's the beginning of adolescence. So I always say the second half of fifth grade, which we're in right now, is when things often start to go south socially for kids. In middle and high school, lagging social executive function skills can include the ones we mentioned before. They often start there. The other thing that we tend to see for middle and high schoolers is they start retreating into an online world of video games and social media. their inflexibility may get worse around age 14 to 15. I've never seen this discussed in any literature, so I came up with a term for it. I call it the inflexibility tipping point. I don't know why this happens, but consistently for years, I have seen kids around age 14 or 15, if their inflexibility has been accommodated at that point, that there's a sharp kind of rise in their inflexibility from that point on. Another thing I often see in kids in middle school and high school is criticizing other kids, particularly those with ADHD. So saying things like those kids are weird, they're annoying. And in my information I share when kids come to my school year programs or summer camp, I tell parents before the program starts, for some of you, expect that your son is going to come home and say the other kids were weird or they were annoying or whatever. I said, that's his initial discomfort. It will, dissipate, okay? But you should expect that. And almost every time I hear that, a kid does say that. Inappropriate use of humor, like I had mentioned before. Here's another big one, only wanting to befriend kids with higher social status who are not accepting of him or her. I see a lot of kids with ADHD. I mean, I shouldn't say a lot, but I've seen enough throughout my career where there's kids who want to be friends with them or they could be friends with, but those kids don't have higher enough social status for them. So rather than connecting with the kids who want to be with them, their inflexibility causes them to sit home isolated because those more, quote, popular kids are not accepting of them and they most likely never will. So, it's really sad to see that because really the only thing that's keeping them socially isolated is their own inflexibility. Another one that's really common is kids lacking an understanding that other kids their age spend time with their peers outside of school. A lot of parents will say to me, well, my son says nobody hangs out anymore. They just, socialize over Xbox. Well, the reality is kids are going out less more and staying at home more than ever before, but they're still getting together and kids still spend time together in real life all the time. So another question I get a lot, will my child ever grow out of this? Well, they might. Okay, but there's no way to predict that. One of the things I will tell you in my experience is that physical impulsivity and hyperactivity improves with brain development, and social executive function skills improve to varying degrees in individuals. But here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever met an adult who says offensive or hurtful things, yet seems oblivious about it? I've had many of those parents in my office before. They might struggle to understand how they come across to others. Have you ever met an adult who has a propensity to argue or exhibits black or white thinking where things are one extreme or the other, use an abrasive tone with others, or misses kind of the big picture? Well, those are examples of adults with social executive function challenges. And what I can tell you is, having gone to the CHAD conference for many, many years, I am always in a session where I hear an adult make a comment or use a tone of voice that is, I call cringeworthy. And I know that they're not meaning to come across like that, but that's their own difficulty with perspective taking. But on a weekly basis, I delete comments like this from my social media. Now, this one is extreme, which is why I used it. But what I want to tell you is, because, I have a presence on social media, every week I find that there are negative comments. And interestingly, they take kind of two different sides based on gender. I find with guys, their comments are often meant to be funny, but their humor would come off as strange or inappropriate. And that's why I'm deleting those comments. And for women, often what I find is their comments are argumentative, or it's a lot of what we would call virtue signaling. I don't know why this is. It's just an observation I've made. My point being that, yes, many adults with ADHD still struggle with their social executive function skills, which is why we need to address this as soon as possible. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is a presentation in itself. This was actually my presentation topic this year at the International Conference on ADHD, the CHAD conference, the difference between social executive function challenges and social anxiety. They are two separate things, and they are both somewhat poorly understood. I can't tell you how many therapists have reached out to me and said, I'm working with a child who has social anxiety. They need a social skills group. My answer to them is no, they don't, because the research shows that social skills groups in offices are not effective for kids with ADHD, but that because they have social anxiety does not mean they have social executive function challenges. And they're very confusing. So I just want to differentiate the difference between them for you. Social anxiety is a fear of others' judgment. In kids with ADHD, it's often specific to similar age peers. And it is also not uncommon, as we know about 30% of the population with ADHD also presents with anxiety. One of the things I want to ask the parents listening right now is please do not presume that your child has social anxiety just because you're reading this. I find that parents often rush to this assumption. And that's something that I determine through doing, an evaluation. I can ask kids questions and really kind of figure this out. One of the things is that kids often don't verbalize social anxiety. Sometimes parents recognize it, but particularly I find for, teens and tweens, particularly boys, they don't really have the language to describe social anxiety. And interestingly, when I find that I discuss it with them, particularly with boys, they think they're the only one in the world who's ever had it, because boys don't talk about this. And I explain that to them, that this is not something that boys talk about, which is why we're talking about it. And I also talk about this in my programs because I want to normalize it and I want kids to understand it's okay to talk about this. So let's talk about, before we talk about what does help build social executive function skills, what does not help build them. So please keep in mind, social executive function challenges are a learning issue, not a mental health issue. So the things that do not help, as I mentioned before, being around kids with more developed social executive function skills. Role playing, kind of scripted, socially appropriate behaviors does not work. I'm sure a lot of you have heard to role play with your kids. Here's why that doesn't work. All social interactions are context dependent, meaning they vary based on what's happening in that moment in time, where you are, who are the people involved. So if you're going to role play, you would really have to role play almost every variable of that situation, based on who is there. Well, obviously that's not realistic. Traditional talk therapy and counseling is not effective in addressing social executive function challenges. And we're going to talk about why it's not even a recommended treatment for kids with ADHD. And as I mentioned, social skills groups, and I'll show you why. So some research here, and I want to quote this from this academic article that I cited here. Although social skills training is a common intervention approach, evidence to date suggests that social skills training has limited efficacy, at least when provided in traditional clinic-based settings. Okay. So I want to use this example here of a social skills group I saw advertised. So I'm going to read it for the people who are listening to the podcast replay of this. It says, this 10-week group therapy program will help boys develop social skills. Topics include friendship, communication, conflict resolution, taking responsibility, recognizing, expressing feelings, self-esteem, decision-making, and responsibility. Boys enrolled in these groups will master these topics while interacting with their peers. Really? Because I've been doing this for a long time and I could never cover that much stuff in 10 weeks. So that's not realistic. But the other thing I want you to understand is, and I say to parents, because often they say, well, how long this will take? I tell parents, if you have a 10-year-old, we're not going to cover in 10 weeks what they haven't learned intuitively in 10 years. We're not even going to cover that in 10 months. Improving social executive function skills is a slow process. The variables that help are when kids are socially motivated and they want the help, but also when we teach them in the moment, which is why I have a webinar series about this for parents. So I want to share this because a lot of parents are never told the American Academy of Pediatric treatment recommendations for ADHD. So for children 6 and over, it's medication management in conjunction with parent behavior training, which is a vague term that was left vague on purpose for some reason. I provide parent training. I don't do the medication piece, obviously, because I'm not a licensed medical professional. In my experience, most professionals are unfamiliar with these treatment recommendations, and thus they recommend ineffective interventions such as individual therapy and social skills groups. One of the most common things I hear from parents is they say to me, we have spent years and lots of money on therapy and these social skills groups, and we haven't seen any progress. And then I explain that this is the reason why. So to quote Dr. Stephen Hinshaw from his excellent Attitude webinar last spring, therapy might help for other conditions, but there is no consistent evidence that these treatments are effective for the symptoms of ADHD. And I believe he is 100% spot on there. But I want to explain a little more why individual therapy is not recommended, because this does have to do with social executive functioning. Okay. So kids with ADHD live in the moment and they learn best in the moment. On the left here, this visual, you see episodic memory. Episodic memory is the emotions associated with experiences and how we recall those emotions and apply the information learned from those experiences to the present or the future. Kids with ADHD have weak episodic memory for reasons that we don't really know. Often their episodic memory is tied to strong negative emotions, meaning they tend to not really remember emotions of past experiences unless it's something very negative. So let me give you an example. Let's say that your son or daughter went to a summer camp last year in your community. They had a great time. They loved it. And you ask them this time of year, do you want to go back? And they say, no, it was boring. Well, they don't really think it's boring. They're not remembering from that long ago that they enjoyed it. That's episodic memory. Okay. So what we have to do is we have to help them connect their emotions from past social experiences that they enjoyed or where they were successful with things in the present and near future. On the other end of this visual, we have future thinking skills. So your ability to visualize yourself doing something in the future. So if kids with ADHD live in the moment, they have difficulty with episodic memory. They have difficulty with future thinking skills. So that's why we have to teach them in the moment and why parents really have the most important role in helping kids improve their social executive function skills. So some of what I teach kids in my school year and summer camp programs, so situational awareness, reading the field, their role in cultivating and sustaining friendships. A lot of times because of their difficulty with perspective taking or their lack of experience, kids with ADHD expect the other kids to do all the work. So we really have to teach them reciprocity in relationships, and they have a role in cultivating and sustaining relationships. There's work involved they have to do. For elementary schoolers, I do a program called How to Do Recess, which is for elementary schoolers. And in that program, I teach reciprocal play skills like sharing an imagination and good sportsmanship and, being flexible for the sake of unstructured play. For the middle schoolers, and the high schoolers, I teach how male friendships evolve, because it is a little different than how male-female friendships evolve or how female-female friendships evolve. Using humor appropriately, getting through initial social anxiety when you're in a new social situation, showing interest in others. This is a huge one. I see so many kids who are so likable and they are outgoing and they are socially motivated, but they don't know how to show interest in others. So even though they like being with other kids and want to spend time with them, the other kids don't know that because they're not showing specific interest in those kids. Another thing I teach is how to structure hanging out. I cover that in my Socially Smarter webinar series. And then the perspective taking piece is where we start. So different types of thoughts. This is a graphic I created to show kind of how friendships evolve and the different types of relationships we have. And at the bottom here, it says stranger or gaming acquaintance. And I say to kids, why do you think I have gaming acquaintance at the bottom here? And the reason why I do is because a lot of kids with ADHD will say, well, I have friends, they're on Xbox. And if you say, well, tell me about them, they don't know anything about them except for the gaming tag. I've seen lots of kids buy online games for other kids who they game with who they don't really know anything about them. And sometimes I've seen them buy, Fortnite skins or whatever it is for another kid because they want to be liked. So we have to teach them that you don't buy friends and that somebody who you game with, who you know nothing about, is not your friend. They are a gaming acquaintance. Just a few pictures of my most recent program. I call it Guys Group. This was the last one we just finished last Sunday, starting the next one in a few weeks. So I do a lesson in these concepts, and then we will go and take a walk on the beach because I live here at the beach, or we will go to the pizza place, or like last week we made cookies. So this gentleman here was handing out the cookies. So that's the kind of stuff we do. And that's a picture at the pizza place. And before this, by the way, I want to mention I do front loading. So we talk about, what's expected when we go to a pizza place and how's it different going to a restaurant when you're with friends versus when you're with your parents. Because a lot of kids, particularly middle schoolers, they haven't had that experience yet of going out to eat without their parents. So that's, something that we talk about. So let's talk about some strategies you can use to help build social executive function skills. So number one is sharing your internal dialogue, your own brain coach out loud, to help model what perspective taking sounds like. So keep in mind, if your son or daughter has difficulty with perspective taking, they're not hearing them talk to themselves necessarily. So when we model what perspective taking sounds like, it helps them have an understanding of what it actually is. So here are some examples of some language I would use with it. It was nice of that guy to pick up the lady's umbrella. She probably had clutch thoughts about a stranger doing something nice for her. I'm feeling a little bored right now because you're having a one-way conversation with me about Minecraft. I wish we can talk about something that we can both talk about. I wonder if that girl realizes other people are having cringy thoughts because of how loud she's talking on her phone. I noticed then when we were at Tyler's house, you did a good job doing a fake out when Tyler asked you if you wanted to play basketball, even though you don't really like basketball. A fake out is a term I use for faking interest in something or somebody, because that's what we have to do in relationships, because people do that for us. You know, one of the things I tell kids is that the day you walk into kindergarten, we should teach you you're going to be bored for the next 13 years. Get used to it. But we don't teach kids that. And often for kids with ADHD, they haven't learned that you have to sometimes fake interest in others, right? And that's part of a relationship. And that's teaching reciprocity in relationships, because people do that for you. One of the things I want to mention about this, when people hear me talk about this, the new thing that I'll hear is they'll say, well, isn't that masking? So for those of you who are not familiar with the term, masking is a term used in the autism community to describe when somebody has to hide, certain autistic traits. So real quick, I'll give you an example. One of my former students who I'm close with, he feels that when he's at his job, he has to make his voice sound more enthusiastic because he's quite monotone and his affect is quite flat. So that's an example of masking. He feels like he has to do that. Keep in mind, masking requires perspective taking, but the way I'm seeing it used is it's not being used in the right context. So what I tell people is, well, if you don't want to teach your kids to do a fake out and show interest in others, well, then you can tell them just to walk out of class when they're bored, or if somebody's talking to them and they're bored, they should just walk away, because nothing's more important than them being able to show how they feel at any given moment. And I add on to that, I think that's a recipe for profound narcissism. So the reason I bring this up is because I do hear this term used incorrectly so much. So this is a strategy I teach, is cause and effect on the impact of our words or on our words and behaviors on others based on the context of the situation. Because remember, all social interactions are context dependent. So this is a tool I made that parents can use with kids called the clutch neutral cringy figure outer. So we start off with what's the bigger picture. Then we look at, my words and behaviors. Did my words and behaviors give them clutch, neutral, or cringy thoughts? What did they do or say because of their thoughts? How did I feel about their reaction? And should I do anything differently next time? When we make things visual for kids and we can show kind of the cause and effect of their social behaviors, it makes things much more clear to them. Because a lot of times when parents try to discuss this with kids, it sounds like lecturing and kids get defensive real quick. Here's another tool I made. And one of the things I teach is that there is no right or wrong when it comes to your thoughts or others' thoughts. Rather, there's a range of thoughts others have based on the context of the situation, and we have based on the context of the situation. So this is called the cringe to clutchometer. So I use this to teach, how somebody's thoughts can change based on what you're saying or doing, and how your thoughts about them can change as well. And again, when we talk about what's the bigger picture, that's the context of the situation. One thing, I just want to go back to this real quick. The way the ADHD brain works is that many kids with ADHD are great at focusing on details. They're not so great at the bigger picture. And interestingly, that is the same skill set why a lot of kids with ADHD struggle with summarizing and inferencing, because that is the same skill set as situational awareness, where you're required to take different parts of information, put them together as a whole, and make meaning of them. So really what we're doing as part of this is teaching context, so we can make sure that they understand the context of the situation. This is something I used to teach situational awareness. So I take a picture of something, okay, or you can take a picture of something, and things we need to think about to read the field before we get out of the car at Walmart. When are we going to be there? Well, we're going to be there Saturday around 5 p.m., which is their busiest day of the week, but not busiest time, so there will be a good number of cars in the parking lot. What would reading the field in the parking lot look like? Look to see if cars have their lights on, because that means they might be pulling out. Don't walk too close to the cars because the driver might not be paying attention. Anything else that's important to read the field in the parking lot? You shouldn't be looking at your phone while you're walking in a busy parking lot. I cannot tell you how many times, because I've been doing my programs for a long time now. I see kids almost cross the street without looking when we're in parking lots. They're not paying attention. So what I always want parents to understand is teaching situational awareness is teaching safety awareness. So before I just finish up with some do's and don'ts, I just wanted to mention again my YouTube channel. I have videos for parents and kids there. You can click on playlists and you'll see the different playlists labeled parents, and the ones for kids are called the Dude Talk playlist. And I also have a Facebook group and a Facebook business page you're welcome to join. And I'm on Instagram as well. And I post my videos and my content there. So, please feel free to join any of them. Just type in ADHD Dude on, whatever your preferred social media is. All right, so some do's and don'ts. Do require your son or daughter to contribute to your home and teach them to think about the needs of others in your family. That teaches reciprocity in relationships. I see so many kids with ADHD who have no responsibilities at home. Nothing is required of them. And what I explain to these parents is that you're not teaching them to think about others, right? If all your child's only responsibility is school, and their whole identity is wrapped up in being a student, well, number one, not only are you not teaching them to think about others, but you're denying them an opportunity to have a sense of purpose and feel good about themselves. And I will tell you, when I've taught parents, and they've done this, when they start giving their kids responsibility at home, they find that their behavior improves. And why does their behavior improve? Because they feel useful. So we have to help kids with ADHD feel useful. That is so incredibly important, okay? Require them to participate in extracurricular activities, particularly at school. I don't care what it is, but they need to be involved in extracurricular activities. I will tell you, and this is one of the things I tell parents, I have seen Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and youth groups, at a church or synagogue, do more for kids than any social skills group out there. We have to tap into their episodic memory to help them recall past social successes and to help them remember what was enjoyable about social situations with peers. We have to use what I call purposeful recognition and praise to help them specifically understand what they did well with in social situations. So let me give you an example of what I call empty praise. Empty praise is things like "you're so smart" or "great job." Purposeful recognition and praise is recognizing things that require effort, resiliency, flexibility, getting through uncomfortable things, trying new things, and giving really specific praise about it. So that's purposeful recognition and praise. So that's why I say we always praise effort and resiliency and thinking about others. Do expect defensiveness if you try to help improve social executive function skills without an education on the topic, which is why I'm so glad you're here today. Do be extremely patient because the process of improving these skills is so slow, but you will see progress, but it's going to come gradually. And do expect inconsistency in your child's social executive function skills because ADHD is a condition of inconsistent performance. And that's something that I think is not talked about enough. Some don'ts. Do not use your child's sibling relationships or your parent-child relationship as an indicator of your child's social competency. Kids don't feel the need to use good social skills with immediate family because there's no social ramifications for, not being considerate of your younger sister, okay? So a lot of times parents will say to me, well, I want him to use better social skills with his brother or sister. And I say to them, that's something that you will change through making some behavior modifications, which I teach in my parent behavior training program. But how they interact with their siblings is not an indicator of their social skills. So that's a completely separate issue, okay? This is a huge one. Do not accommodate in flexibility. I have a saying, flexibility is cultivated, inflexibility is accommodated. I see a lot of families who constantly accommodate their child's inflexibility. They let them get out of things they don't want to do. They allow their child to dictate what they're doing and not doing. And I get it. Sometimes it's not worth the battle. But the more we accommodate inflexibility, it does cause the inflexibility to grow. Don't get pulled into the argument, negotiation, reasoning vortex. This is a huge thing I teach parents. I see so many parents doing that, particularly around helping with social executive function skills. Kids start arguing with them. They try to start reasoning with them, and it gets nowhere, okay? Don't expect too much growth in the development of social executive function skills if you decide to treat ADHD your way instead of following the American Academy of Pediatrics treatment recommendations. So I want to be really clear. I am not talking about here about the 15% of individuals who cannot tolerate stimulants. But what I will tell you is, and what I tell families is, before they sign up for my membership site, I have information saying if your child is unmedicated, I don't think you should sign up for my membership site because what I teach is really not going to be that helpful. Okay. We just have to be realistic about that again, treatment recommendations for ADHD, parent behavior training in conjunction with medication management. So can kids improve socially without medication? I don't know really. I mean, I can tell you a lot of the cases I've seen with kids who are unmedicated, what it results in is them finding marijuana in middle school or high school, and that kind of becomes their social connection. Because when you have difficulty with social executive function challenges, who are always going to hang out with you? Well, the kids who are into drugs. Okay. And that is actually consistent with the research shows that individuals with ADHD who go unmedicated have 100% higher chance of developing a substance abuse problem. So you can read about that if you do some research on it. Last thing, please do not prioritize protecting their feelings over teaching social appropriateness. If you do that, they will learn social appropriateness from their peers who will not be concerned about protecting their feelings. So a lot of times, like for instance, when I teach parents, addressing when your kid's having one-way conversations, they say, I don't want to hurt his feelings. And I say he can learn this from somebody who he knows loves him unconditionally, or he can learn this from other kids at school who are not that invested in him. Preferably, I think he should learn it from you. So one thing to finish off before questions, you can protect your children from experiencing temporary discomfort, or you can prepare them to navigate socially in the world, but you can't do both. The social world is often uncomfortable, so if you protect them at the expense of developing social competency and resiliency, then all they will have left is to hope that you will always be there to protect them from experiencing discomfort. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it, and I am happy to answer some questions.
Ryan, thank you so much. I know that my notebook is full, and I feel like we have a lot of questions to get to. So I will quickly just say thank you once again to our sponsor, Play Attention. And I will launch into the most common question, which is, where do I go for help? We know that your program is very unique. And so for those parents who are not in your geographic region, can you offer some criteria or good questions to ask as they seek out resources to help in their region?
Yeah, I'm going to be very realistic with people here. And I want to preface this by saying I am not trying to be salesy here with what I'm going to tell you, but most of the, running a social skills group is, despite the fact that it, as I mentioned, the research shows that it's not effective. There are no requirements to run social skills groups. Any of you can tomorrow go out and start advertising that you're a social skills expert or run a group, and you'll get kids. So that being said, besides the fact that the research shows they're not effective, most people doing this don't really have training in this, okay? So I just want to keep that in mind. So the question is, what do we do about that? Well, that's why I created a program for parents, because I want parents to be able to have the skills and the language to teach this in the moment, because regardless of anything else, they are the most important teachers because you are with your child the most, and you are the one who's going to help them learn how to navigate socially and help improve their social executive function skills. So regardless if it's me, my program, or somebody else, what I want to explain to you is it's not about sending your kids somewhere. It's about you taking the learning into your own hands here, and you all have the capacity to do that.
That is a great reminder. So that leads to our next question, which is parents who are having trouble initiating this conversation, especially among teenagers. We all know that teenagers are not always eager to engage in self-reflection, especially with their parents. And also parents worry that by bringing it up, they will be sort of doing some self-esteem damage. Do you have any advice, talking points to begin this conversation with a child who is struggling with social executive function skills?
Yeah. So let's talk about the fact that this is a source of shame for a lot of kids, okay? Because it makes them feel that something is wrong with them, that something that comes intuitively to everyone around them doesn't come so easily to them. And they're often not aware that other kids also struggle with this, which is why I also normalize it for kids. But I'm going to go back to what I said about if you're worried about hurting their self-esteem is going to be hurt much worse by being socially ostracized, by being rejected. So to my point of my last slide, you can protect their feelings, right? Or you can choose to address things and they're going to be temporarily upset with you. But what is more important to you? Is it more important to help them, or is it more important to protect their feelings so they don't get temporarily upset with you? In terms of bringing up this conversation, it doesn't need to be a one-time conversation. You can just kind of jump into this and start doing the things that I'm telling you. There doesn't need to be a formal introduction to this. Now, keep in mind, right, particularly for adolescents, if they struggle with perspective taking, they don't understand how they're coming across to others, which is why a lot of kids with ADHD, as I mentioned, will criticize other kids who do the exact same things as them. So what we want to do is we want to be able to teach these skills, but you don't have to do it in any kind of formal way because it is teaching in the moment. So my point being, it's not a conversation that you have to have, but it is something that you have to address. And the best thing is just acknowledge that, it's a source of shame. You don't have to say that to them, okay? But understand the defensiveness is not necessarily because they're upset or angry with you. It's because this is really hard for them. All right. And because it is a source of shame. But what I tell parents is don't get into playing armchair therapist and saying, how does that make you feel? And does it, is it hurt your feelings that, the kids aren't calling you? That's not necessary. We want to get in and take actionable steps to help them build their social executive function skills.
Okay. And to that end, I'm picking up on a couple of themes here. One of which is parents reporting that their child is socially isolated and seems unbothered by this, that they report that they are happy sitting at home, not engaging in real life interaction. The parents are wondering the degree to which they should force extracurricular activities and these social interactions when their child does not seem depressed or otherwise upset.
Yeah. Well, my answer to that is, number one, it's much easier to stay home and not have to interact with people. And video games are something you have mastery over. So you are never in an uncomfortable situation. You are doing something that you have a sense of mastery and control over. So of course that's easier than socializing because the social world is uncomfortable and it's unpredictable. And what I would say to those parents who say, well, my child's not upset and they seem perfectly content, I'd say, okay. So let's say they go through their whole school career, and if they go to college, basically only interacting with other people through screens, and they never have real life social experiences. Do you think that that's going to affect them long term? I certainly do, and I've seen the effects of it actually. So at the end of the day, right, we have to think about what our long-term goal is here. And I think for most parents, they want their children to be happy and functional adults who are capable of working. But if you lack the experiences of learning how to navigate socially through the world because all of your interaction has been sitting in front of screens, watching TikTok or playing video games, that is going to have an effect on you long term, unless you decide to change it on your own, or unless as parents, we step into our parental authority and say, hey, this is not how I'm going to let you go through life, is just interacting through screens. So yes, I would say absolutely every kid should be involved in extracurricular activities, whether they like it or not. A lot of times I'll say that, if they're not athletic, say, do one thing that's, something that they enjoy, whatever at school, at club. And then one thing that involves movement, because we know how important exercise is for kids. And it doesn't have to be a competitive sport, but something physical, I think, is really important as well.
Okay. Very helpful. The other theme that I'm seeing here, and this anecdotally, just among the comments I'm getting in the webinar itself, seems to be more prevalent among girls. And that is how sort of rejection sensitive dysphoria or a fear of failure seems to be keeping them at home. And that, as we know, stems from a lifetime of ADHD challenges, especially when that ADHD is undiagnosed. So can you offer any advice for the balance for parents who realize that this is a neurological, fallout from their ADHD and being sensitive to that while also encouraging their child to?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to mention is it's just as common in boys as it is in girls, but boys might not always articulate it. So one of the things I teach kids is that there are going to be times in life when you want to be friends with somebody, they don't want to be friends with you. There's going to be other times where somebody wants to be friends with you and you're not interested in them. And that's just part of life. So if you want to be friends with somebody and they don't reciprocate, that does not mean anything is wrong with you at all. This is just life. And you're going to experience this through the rest of your life, whether it's at work, whether it's at high school, a job, whatever it might be, there's always going to be times where people are not reciprocal with us when we want to form a relationship with them. Okay. And that's both friendships and romantic relationships as well. So it's okay if you're really upset by that. And it's okay if you're really hurt by that. But that doesn't mean we can just hide out, right, and be on TikTok or video games. We still have to go out and experience these things because this is how we practice them, and this is how we learn to interact with others and have life experiences.
Okay, so the third theme that I'm seeing is kids who are, and you mentioned this a bit with the ones who are so desperate to make friends with the unattainable popular kids, kids who are, in order to gain the favor and attention of their classmates, they're becoming the class clown, or they're picking up vaping, or they're smothering the people that they want to impress. Where does this fit into the paradigm, and how can parents sort of rein in this behavior?
Yeah. Well, those are three that I feel like all three of those warrant different answers. So let's talk about the smothering one, because that's really common. So that's part of the perspective taking piece, right? And we have to help kids understand that even though you're enthusiastic and this, new friend might like you, if you are a little too much for them, it might scare them off. Okay. And that's why I use the clutch, neutral, cringy figure outer to help make that visual for kids to understand, right? That what being developing a new friendship takes time. You can't rush it. And if you force it like that, it's going to push other kids away, because really what it takes is time and patience. And it's okay if you feel impatient, and it's okay if you're excited about this, but that's not where the other kid is necessarily, right? So we have to meet them where they are. In terms of the class clown thing, I have a saying, for a lot of kids with ADHD, negative attention is better than no attention. So I think what we have to do is we have to help them in school find things that they feel good about. Or I think I would also ask the teacher who seems like they could possibly connect with them. And one of the things I see parents get into a lot of lectures of saying, they're laughing at you, not with you, so you should stop that. And I say to parents, they don't care about that. Right? It doesn't matter if they're laughing with them or laughing at them. It's social validation. So, one of the things I've done with kids who are kind of the class clown is, I'll have them learn a magic trick, or have them, be able to show other kids something so they can learn to, because I want them to have the experience of being able to get attention in a more positive way, just so they can see that that's possible. Okay. As for the thing about the vaping, one of the things that I unfortunately see this quite often. And one of the things, we have to say to kids is, if you took away the vaping or the smoking pot, would they still be your friends? What would happen? And that's really hard for those kids to hear sometimes, but this is what this is about. We have to have conversations with our kids that are going to be uncomfortable and might be painful for them. But again, if you're not doing that, then they're going to learn it from their peers who are not going to be invested in them like you are.
Mm-hmm. It is so important. We had a lot of interest in the concept you introduced about the inflexibility tipping point. Mm-hmm. And wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about preventative, what might that look like in real life? Mm-hmm. And how might we begin before age 14 to reverse that trend?
Yeah. So again, I want to mention, I have researched this topic comprehensively, and I've never seen anything in the ADHD literature about this. I don't even think I've seen anything in the autism literature about this, because I find that with anybody with, executive function challenges or social executive function challenges, it's quite common. So what I see happen really is around that age, so typically between 8th grade and 9th grade, that kids just suddenly become more inflexible. They're less receptive to things. But I want to tell you what the long-term trajectory of this is. These are often the guys who I see go off to college. Things start getting difficult for them and they won't go for help. And then they're done college somewhere during their first semester. Because it's not because they couldn't handle the work. It's not even because of their, executive functioning or time management. Sometimes it is, but often it's because they're so inflexible, they won't accept help from anybody and they self-sabotage. And unfortunately, that's sometimes the lesson they have to learn, the natural consequence to become more flexible. So in terms of what we can do about it, the number one thing is you have to kind of look at how am I accommodating his or her inflexibility? Am I doing things to avoid an argument? Am I doing things because I don't want to, have to listen to the, what I call the noise or the emotional manipulation? You hate me, this is why you're doing this. So you have to learn how to handle that, and you have to learn how to not accommodate in flexibility. And that's how their flexibility is going to grow. And sometimes it's going to be a bumpy path. And sometimes things are going to get worse before they get better, but they will get better. And by the way, this is stuff I cover in not Socially Smarter, my social executive function webinar series, but in my series called Scaffolding Better Behavior. I teach about not accommodating in flexibility. So if I can also recommend a book on this topic that I absolutely love. It's work that I'm doing training in right now. The book is called Courageous Parents by Chaim Omer. You can find it on Amazon, and it will really help you with this as well. It's a fabulous book for parents.
Perfect. So we will be sure to include a link to that book in the resources section for the webinar replay. And a number of people out there are asking if the Q&A section will be included in the webinar replay. Yes, absolutely. We will include the full hour here. And unfortunately, our hour is up, but this was such a dynamic and engaging conversation. Many more questions out there. Obviously, a lot of parents who really are dedicated to helping their children thrive and who have a lot of questions. So we could do 10 more in this series and never answer them all. But Ryan, thank you for the very detailed and thoughtful answers that you did provide today and for just contributing to the Attitude community.
And thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and who's listening to this. I really appreciate it. And if you want to dive in a little deeper, I do have a social skills playlist at my YouTube channel where you can, watch some videos on the topics that I talked about today. And then the ones for kids are in the Do Talk playlist. So thank you, Annie, and thank you, Attitude. And thank you, everyone who tuned in. I really appreciate your time.
Wonderful. We'll include that link as well. And we hope everyone listening, we hope you will join us for another webinar. Visit attitudemag.com/newsletters to make sure that you sign up to get alerts about all of our upcoming webinars and other content. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 390. That's 390 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the certificate of attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Everyone have a great day, and thanks so much for joining us.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.